quite quickly it came to your only option really if you want to do anything further is IVF, which is something I thought was a very long way off and was quite shocked by that reality.
I'd say the two things that it shook my identity around are like landmarks in life. Suddenly, you know, like in life you think about birthdays and Christmases and first days of school, and you think about like going to your children's wedding and maybe have grandchildren one day and who'll look after you when you're old, and suddenly that was like a blank road ahead of you.
Initially, I think I felt incredibly very let down, very frustrated, going through periods of not trusting God in it, because it seemed to me that he wasn't there.
My husband never wanted our infertility to become this thing that turned us inward. And so we worked really hard at trying to make sure people wouldn't feel uncomfortable if they did get pregnant around us.
Thank you so much for being a part of our growing community. It honestly is just such an honour and such a dream to see how Magnify is growing. For anyone who's new to our channel, Magnify is a network, community and platform focused on empowering ambitious women of faith to thrive in our various spheres of influence.
And we know how important it is to have safe, honest, authentic conversations as women of faith. And so we want to provide a space to do that.
My name is Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm part of Team Magnify. We'll be your hosts and we'll also be featuring guests each time.
So if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, share with a friend who you think would benefit.
Alexandra Calder is a TV producer who works as a freelancer across all major British TV channels. Despite feeling the struggles of being a Christian in the industry, it's an area she loves and feels called to. Abby McIlrath works in production in London. She lived in Malaysia for 8 years, where she was head of creative at a church in Kuala Lumpur. She is passionate about building great teams and helping people to feel part of the church. This is a sensitive topic, and we know many women have to navigate this, which is why we're so honoured today to have Alexandra and Abby here to share their own journeys and experiences in the hope that this will provide some comfort and some wisdom for anyone facing something similar. So navigating infertility is a real conversation that a lot of women maybe are not having, but it's something that they're going through. And I know especially for us and our Magnify community, it's real. And sometimes, I guess, maybe when we think we want children, we begin to try and it doesn't happen in the way we thought. And there can be a lot of shame attached to that, and fear and guilt and all kinds of things, grief. And so thank you so much for both being here, because we want to hear your stories. And I think learn also in the midst of the pain and grief, where's faith in the middle of it? Where's God in the middle of it? And yeah, we just want to hear your stories. So thank you so much. So Abby, it would be amazing if you don't mind just to tell us a bit of your story around infertility.
Yeah, of course. I think I want to say at the outset that everyone, if you're experiencing infertility or you have, or you know someone close to you that is, that everyone experiences it in a slightly different way. It's very individual how you feel about it. I went through infertility with one of my closest friends. She was experiencing it, and how she experienced it and how I experienced it was kind of actually worlds apart. For me and my husband Stu, I got married when I was 22 years old, and we moved to Malaysia immediately. 3 days later. And so for the first few years of our marriage, we were trying not to get pregnant. It was a bit of a priority. And so a few years into marriage, though, I felt like it was the time. We felt like it was maybe the right time to start trying for kids. We'd done a lot of traveling. We kind of felt like we ticked a lot of boxes. Okay, this is the next thing. And I really naively, even though I'd experienced that with my friends, that I just thought, well, I'm 26. I'll come off my contraception 4 months in, 6 months max, I'll get pregnant. And that was not the case. So we began trying, 6 months in, nothing, a year, nothing, a year and a half, nothing, 2 years, 2.5 onwards. I just never got that positive pregnancy test. It just never happened for us. And so we began to explore why that might be happening about a year into being infertile. And 2.5 years in, we were diagnosed with unexplained infertility. I'd say both of us were B-. And so it just wasn't a good combination. We were given the stat that it was 4 to 5% chance of conceiving naturally, which was really rubbish. I really hated that diagnosis. I found it a bit grey, to be honest. I wanted more of a problem that we could fix. And so being faced with that, you have decisions to make about what sort of medical intervention you will take. We didn't do Well, we took supplements and we tried to get really healthy. I made sure I was like fit and healthy and that my body could do this. And then, about 3 years in, we hadn't stopped trying. We were doing the basics, making sure you could still get pregnant. But we stopped like counting the days. I knew I wasn't like buying pregnancy tests every month, like really excited to see what they were going to say. And then I found out through a blood test that I was pregnant. And so 10 months ago, so I have nearly a 1-year-old called Arthur. So we're very thankful for him.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. Ali, how about you? Could you just share a little of your story of infertility and that kind of period of your life?
Yeah. I think I'll go right back to before I got married, because I feel like that sort of played an initial kind of start, I guess, to my story and how I felt about the whole thing emotionally and my faith and so on. In retrospect, it wasn't late, but at the time I got married at 30. I felt like I got married really late. Lots of my friends kind of across the board, different walks of life, all got married kind of late 20s or so, and then started having children. And I, as I said, got together with my husband when I was 28 and we got married when I was 30. We were both feeling quite ready for kids quite soon. I think feeling like I'd waited for my husband. I was kind of notoriously single for a long time. I was always the one who was at the wedding single, trying to be set up with someone. I sort of felt like I'd really kind of paid my dues. I felt really held by God. I felt like I was, the gift of my husband felt so huge to me. I mean, I'm sure it does, and so it should to everyone, but I think I really felt, I suppose, honored in my waiting season and of being, sort of, I suppose, doing what I did and praying as I did and remaining faithful in lots of ways that I did. I felt really, I guess, honored in that. Anyway, I sort of, for some reason, which I look back now and seems ridiculous and so incorrect, I sort of felt like the next part of our journey, my journey, was going to be sort of easy because I sort of paid my dues, and obviously life does not work like that. But something in my head, I think, made me think that that's how it would go. I felt a real sense of also wanting to sort of catch up with my friends who had kind of had children and got married. And because I felt like a little bit late, I was like, it's cool because I'll probably get pregnant with twins. So like I'll have 2 kids straight away. And like, this mentality I walked into it with, I think. Similar to you, Abby, we just started trying. I'd only been on contraception for a few months, really. About 6 months into our marriage, we started trying for a baby. Nothing happened. Went to the doctor, sort of did some research into why that might be, some investigations. They discovered I had a giant fibroid, which is kind of like a tumor. It's a massive blood and muscle that lots of women have. Lots of us have them kind of in and near our womb. Completely harmless, and often you won't know you have them, or if you do, it doesn't really matter. I just happened to have one that had grown really big. So that ended up being a possibility as to why I wasn't getting pregnant. I had an operation to have that removed. It was quite a big operation, and actually ended up being, I think I'm right in saying, one of the last elective surgeries at the Chelsea in Westminster before lockdown happened the first time. So we felt really like, wow, like obviously so thankful, still am, that went ahead. It just felt like all things were in place for this to be the like one thing that would just get solved and be done, and we could just get pregnant and it would be wonderful. I kind of recovered from that, waited 6 months or so, which was the suggested time before we started trying again. Tried again for a baby, kept trying. Similarly, unexplained infertility. And they were like, yeah, I mean, just that is what it is. Keep trying. There's no reason why we weren't getting pregnant. We just weren't. And then quite quickly it came to your only option really, if you want to do anything further, is IVF, which is something I thought was a very long way off and was quite shocked by that reality. We went through a long process to figure that out, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later. But we ended up doing IVF. We did one round that didn't work out, and then did a second round, which actually was a frozen transfer. So an embryo that from our first round that was kind of still there, that we used, which ended up working. And we have now a also 10-month-old daughter called Tallulah. So it's been a journey. I think, echoing much what you said, Abby, I think I would say that, I find it funny sharing it sometimes because I'm aware that I now have a daughter. I know how the story ends for us. And it's sometimes difficult and frustrating sharing with people who are on a journey, which I love to do. And I think it's important to do. But I'm aware that, this is how it worked out for us. And I'm so thankful for that. And it doesn't negate the pain and the journey that I've had, but I can just share sometimes in friends' frustrations of like, but it worked. So you sort of know how it ends. And when people don't, that's frustrating and hard.
So obviously you're both women of faith. And at the time where you were in these periods of infertility, we also trying to trust a God that can heal and can provide. So Ali, what was going on for you in your faith at the time? Because you're believing in a God maybe who you've seen do miracles, do amazing things, and maybe just thinking, well, where are you or what's happening? So what was going on for you in your own faith at that time?
I think I would say my journey with my faith and with God was the biggest part of the whole thing for me. It was huge. Initially, I think I felt incredibly very let down, very frustrated, going through periods of not trusting God in it, because it seemed to me that he wasn't there, of great confusion, learning a lot about what we are owed, if you will, and how that process works. I think going through the more specific journey of IVF, I made a lot of choices about where I chose to aim my thoughts. And within that, I pushed very hard on my relationship with God. In that, I think, for me, I had certain sort of Bible verses and things. And one that comes to mind is the Philippians 4, when it talks about thinking about things that are lovely and worthy. And I very much had to make strong decisions to really pursue thinking about such things, to quote Paul, and really push in deeper into relationship with God. And I think there were lots of ebbs and flows in that. I would say my predominant initial feeling with God was frustration and hurt. And I felt really let down and confused. Just to lay all my cards on the table, I'd worked really hard to remain pure. I'd, done all the things on paper. I'd worked hard. I always worked hard at school. I'd worked really hard to get this as right as I could. And very quickly, that process of learning how little control I had of it was huge for me. And so I'd say that for me, the first part of it was a lot of pain and frustration and tears. I definitely feel like I never lost faith, but I felt very alone. And then the second half for me, moving into the kind of IVF season, we had to isolate in that time as well. So I think on top of that, my husband and I definitely felt quite cocooned up with God. Quite physically, I guess we were, and literally, and in every shape we were. And I felt that, and actually, therefore it became for me the time I've never felt closer to God, which was extraordinary. And my journey with IVF as a result of that was extraordinary.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that too. Yeah. It's so important. Abby, how about you in that? Just where was your faith at in the thick of, okay, I'm trusting a God who can heal. And I think that's a real thing to say as well. We sometimes just feel like, I've done things the right way. God, I've tried to do things the way you've ordained it or set it. And where are you now? It is a really real feeling. Was that true for you too? Was your journey a bit different? What was going on for you in your faith at that time?
I don't know. I felt like actually other people had more faith for it than I did. And so actually for us, I felt like other people wanted it more for us and would pray for us more than I would pray for myself maybe, or for us. I think the thing that I struggled with was Psalm 127 verse 3 says that children are a gift from God and they're a reward from him. And so I felt kind of livid. I was like, I want the gift. And then I suppose you had to kind of wrestle with, well, if it's a gift from God, how much do I pursue this medically? How much do I make this gift happen? And then why is he not rewarding me? I feel like we moved over to Malaysia to help plant a church. We'd left our family, and I was like, no, like, why am I not being rewarded with a kid? So I think that was like kind of something we wrestled with, especially in terms of then practically how it drove us in the journey of, if this is a gift from God, what does that mean practically? How much should we do or not do to make this happen for us? And I think we live in a society that does say, like, if you work hard enough, you can get it. And with infertility, that's not true. So that was a bit of a wake up for us, that actually, no, you are really out of control. Like what you said, you're really out of control with this. So yeah, God was very close. And I'd say there was a lot of walking and processing. We lived near a park in Malaysia, and we would just, me and my husband would just like walk around and just like process it. Every month it unraveled and you would have to process it again. And okay, well, do we feel like this, or which one, what option are we going to pursue? But I'd say God was very present, but I'd say the most present he was through other people wanting to pray for it.
Yeah, it's good. I know just in walking through this with friends as well, I feel it can be quite common, although it might not apply to you both, but I'd love to hear just in terms of how it impacts your identity for that season, even as a woman sometimes. You were talking earlier about like your body's trying to get your body ready and able. And it's almost that thing that, okay, part of our design as women is to be able to birth children, and how much that can become intertwined with our identity. Did you struggle with that at all?
I'd say the two things that it shook my identity around are like landmarks in life. Suddenly, like in life, you think about birthdays and Christmases and first days of school, and you think about like going to your children's wedding and maybe have grandchildren one day and who'll look after you when you're old. And suddenly that was like a blank road ahead of you. And so me and my husband would often say like, oh my goodness, like what are the landmarks in life now? Because we're married and, that's kind of tick. And now it's like you have children, like that's the next landmark. And then you landmark with them. And so I think that really shook our identity. I think at the start it was like bleak. And then as kind of the 3 years progressed, it turned into more of like an excitement of like, oh, this is a blank road ahead. Like, Lord, what are you going to do? But that took time. That did not. And some months that would feel good and some months it would feel awful. And then I suppose the second thing that it shook with my identity, and I think I've been guilty of this, and especially in the church, is we talk about family life and we mean people with kids. And I used to find it quite difficult sitting in conversations and me and my husband wouldn't be categorized as a family because we didn't have kids. And so I felt quite like isolated and away from that like grip. And I'm like, no, we are a family. Like what makes us not a family? We don't have kids. And what if we never have kids? And I suppose then that's made me quite sensitive to that for other people who I now look out and see, who maybe haven't been able to have children or have chosen not to have children. And so that was the things that shook my identity, are like landmarks, what's ahead. And yeah, are we a family? Can we call ourselves that?
Yeah. How about you, Ali? Was that, in terms of your identity in that period of time for you, were you battling with that, like in terms of your femininity or as a woman, or just in terms of this is my stage of life now where I believed I was going to have children? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it rattled me a lot. Similar to what you're saying with the milestones, for sure. That was huge for me as well. I think I processed a lot of that when I was not sure if I was going to get married or not. And I think, since then I've had a lot of sort of righteous anger about friends who I know would love to be married and are not. And you're like, I can get it to an extent, because I am married, but I'd been there before that, being like, but if I don't get married, then, as you're saying, how does this life move forward? Is it just sort of just me? And is that just it? And obviously that's such a lie, but it's very easy to sink into that and to listen to that sort of lie loudly. It shook me to the very core of who I was as a woman and also who I was as a person, because I can't think of anything I wanted to do more than be a mum for a very long time. I mean, I love my job, and I love all the other facets of life that I'm privileged to have. But being a mum is something I just always wanted to do. You talk with your friends about kids' names and since you were however old, and the dolly called Rachel.
Great name.
But I had as a baby. Exactly. Anyway, and so I felt shaken to the core of who I was as me, as Ali, and I felt shaken to the core of who I was as a woman. And then the sort of monthly cycle that obviously with your monthly cycle comes the monthly cycle of you're not pregnant again, and being like, I just, my period, I don't want my period. What's the point of my period, or having boobs, or going through puberty, and all these things that make you a woman that are to be celebrated. But it feels like biblically and society, everything is building towards having children. And then I got very frustrated with the club of people who were parents, which, being on the flip side, I obviously have more time for and understand. But it's hard when you're like, well, why do you get to talk about this thing and be in this thing and suddenly have it's the understanding look of, oh, you're a parent, you get it. And I'm like, it's that kind of thing used to really frustrate me. And again, when people would talk about, oh, you think you're tired? Oh, wait till you have children. And you're like, I'm allowed to be tired without being a mum. Okay. Things like that I found hard. And it just made me feel like everything of who I was being completely shaken and stripped away from me. And I was mad about it. Yeah. Yeah, totally lost.
Of course, there were two people navigating this, because you're both married and you were at the time when you were trying for children too. How did your husband navigate this differently to you?
So Stu is, I feel like he's got more faith than I do, which was good. But he loves the grey. I like in black and white. Like, we were going into appointments and I was like, I'm going to be so cross if this is like unexplained infertility. That's a rubbish diagnosis. Like, I need to know there's something we can fix. Whereas he was like, no, it means like the Lord can do something. And I was like, oh, like that's just so irritating.
Not now.
Yeah, not right now. So I feel like that was good. I would say that he is, he's very, just like, self-confidence, the wrong word, but he's very like assured of like his identity, and he wasn't shaken by this, and he didn't feel any sense of guilt and shame that his body maybe couldn't do what it was supposed to. And therefore that was really permission given for me to then be like, oh, well, I'm not going to feel bad about this, because actually for us it wasn't anything we had done, it's just the biology of our makeup. And so that was just, it wasn't damage that had been done previously. And so I found that really freeing. But we had a saying in our house during infertility, and we still use it now, and it was that it's okay to change your mind. And so as it like constantly would unravel every month, maybe one month I would be like, no, I really think we need to pursue this option, and you weren't going to be held to that in our house, is what we tried to do, so people can, well, between us, he could just like say, actually, I don't feel like that anymore. Like, I think I'm changing how I feel about this. And I found that really helpful, and that's how we kind of process together.
Yeah, that's good. How about your husband, Ali? How was he processing this? And was it quite different to how you were walking, or was it similar?
Totally different. We're very different people. I'm very extroverted. I'm a chronic oversharer. He is much more measured and considered. I'm really flappy. He's not really. And similar to what you're saying, it sort of worked for us doing this together. It worked well in the different strengths that we brought. I think it became clear to me after a while that I was experiencing a lot of grief. Obviously, I appreciate everyone's journey with grief is very different, and that this was grief of a very different nature in terms of grieving what I thought might happen, what I thought I was as a person, I guess, and what kind of wasn't. And so not to belittle anyone's journey of grief, which I appreciate can be very different and much more extreme and significant. And I started therapy, which ended up being amazing. And it was my therapist that was like, oh, we're in grief therapy. I was like, oh, right, okay. Again, very, very different journey. But my husband and I, Sam, listened to a talk by Rick Warren about his son, who sadly took his own life, and the process that he and his wife went through. And it was amazing. It was, he talked a lot about the kind of ebbs and flows, and how with a husband and wife team, you go through different peaks and troughs at different times. And what you really can't do is try and pull someone up into your peak, or for them to pull you down into their trough. You have to just sort of let them sort of do their thing, let it flow through, and then soon it might be you. And that was very much the situation for us, particularly in IVF, that specific season. There were different things that really got to us in different ways, and it was never at the same time. It was always one of us feeling super low about something while the other one kind of felt all right that day, which was amazing. So it was very different. I felt really held by my husband. And again, seeing how God's hand was in our marriage, we very much complemented each other in how that went. I think it's hard for him, and actually having asked him about it in light of talking about it today, everything physically is obviously on the female. It's very much us. So he's not going to know that I'm not pregnant that month until I tell him I've got my period. It's not something, he's not going to know the period pains niggling that I can just tell mean that my period's coming soon, and that feeling of like deep pain of being like, oh, it could be implantation pains. It might be, oh, it's bleeding, but it could be implantation bleeding. You never know. Some people, this is what happens. And you hear all these stories and you cling on to so much hope. And, so and I'm sure it was the same with Abby, he very much has to ride on what I'm saying, because it's a very, very, very different journey. And I've always been a big champion of the phrase, we are pregnant. And half of me is like, I actually don't, because a man is not pregnant, and what a woman goes through when they're carrying a baby is significant, and it should be marked. And that's same with this journey. I think it is different. I'm not saying men don't grieve it as much. I really don't mean that. The journey is just very different and it needs to be recognized as different. And I felt that was the situation for us, and especially the IVF, you go through so much with your body, and the man has a small one slot part to play in that, whereas you have months of injections and whatever every day, and it's very different. So I felt held by him, and it was a very different process, but we met in the middle very well, and God was in that. I needed that. I needed the sort of stoicism from him, because I was just flapping around.
Yeah. And there's a beauty in the middle of that,
for sure,
of being able to be together in it, even though of course it's completely different. This is happening within your body.
Yeah.
Does make it different as well.
And he sort of let me flat. I just had permission just to be me and just express what I needed to express, because he sort of held it together, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. In the Bible, it talks about celebrating with those who celebrate and mourning with those who mourn. I find this a real challenge anyway, but I think in these kinds of situations, it's kind of at its peak. So I'm really interested from you first, Abby. How did you find people's ability to mourn with you in that time? And equally, how did you feel when others were celebrating becoming pregnant? And I know that's a tough question, but what was that like for you on both sides? Like how people could mourn and comfort you, but also how did you go about, was that a thing? Could you do it?
Yeah, I'd say the mourning thing. So I was really happy to talk about being infertile. If anyone would bring the child conversation near the table, I was like, well. So I was always ready to talk about it and quite happy to. I think it was just building awareness, because people don't always talk about it. So I find that you get kind of two responses. You get people who are just like sit in the like, this sucks with you, like this is rubbish. And those people I like clung to. Like I have a really good friend in Malaysia, and she would know when my like appointments would be. And when I get home, there would be like a chocolate delivery, like waiting for you. Like she was just really present in it. And she never offered like advice. It was always just like, I know this is happening and this is rubbish, and here's some chocolate, which is always good. I find that there's, people go onto autopilot and they don't really know what to say. And so people like to try and offer comfort in ways that I find very not comforting. And you just have to sort of sit and take it. All those phrases that I have probably said myself in years gone by, oh, just relax, or have a hot bath, or when you stop worrying about it, it'll happen. There's a whole Instagram's like dedicated to the things you shouldn't say. And, I would encourage anyone, if you're supporting someone through infertility, go and listen to them. What I found the most helpful was when people would just reflect back what I was saying, so they don't offer anything new to the conversation. That was helpful. In terms of celebrating people, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I never wanted, me and my husband never wanted our infertility to become this thing that turned us inward. And so we worked really hard at trying to make sure people wouldn't feel uncomfortable if they did get pregnant around us. But what I did was kind of put a bit of a measure in place. So, there's only so many Instagram pregnancy announcements that I was going to celebrate. And to be honest, it ended up being none. I removed myself from Instagram. I used to keep a diary of all the people that got pregnant that I didn't even know were pregnant or trying or hadn't, started trying way after us. And so I find that really draining. And so I just was well, actually, I'm not really close to these people and this is sort of just unnecessary. And so I just removed that. And that was really helpful. Created a new Instagram with just helpful things on it. But what I did then do was, because we didn't want it to become this inward awkward thing, is when family and friends who were trying became pregnant, I was we're going to go hard and celebrate you because actually we really want people to get pregnant. We don't want to have this club where nobody can get pregnant. But that's where we decided to place our energy, is in celebrating close friends and family who then got pregnant. So that's how we tried to do it. So get rid of what was not helpful and really put energy into people that we had a relationship with.
Did that help you in any way? Did it hinder you? Just on it, complete real talk.
It's really complicated because you're really happy for people, but it also really hurts. I remember one of our closest friends got pregnant and she got me to check the baby name, to check if he went to school, there was no bad nicknames that people could come up with. So she got me to check it. And I just remember and I was happy to do that and happy to be involved. And glad almost that she'd involved me, because that's the other reaction, that people then don't include you at all. So I was really pleased that she involved me. But then I just remember closing my phone and just weeping that we were never going to get to do that. We're never going to get to choose baby name. And we had the full list of things. And that felt really sad. But I would say if you know someone who can't get pregnant, I just say, if you're announcing your pregnancy, be gentle. Surprise announcements are really hard to deal with. I find that probably the most challenging. If you kind of suspect that it's coming, you can prep yourself going into the dinner where you think they're going, or you see the phone call and you're oh, that's going to be a pregnancy announcement. That's fine. But I think the surprise ones are very difficult. So it was really, really mixed. And some days you feel you can handle it. And some days it actually just felt you know what, I don't want to, if one more person talks about being pregnant, I just need to cut myself away from this. So kind of retreat from it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really helpful to hear as well. How about you, Ali? So in terms of people being able to mourn with you or sit with you in your grief and your pain at that time and not try and fix it. And then equally how was the celebration side of things? Because that can look very differently. We need boundaries around that as well sometimes. But with people who were close to you, maybe becoming pregnant at the time or being around you with children, what was that like?
Yeah, Abby and I had quite a lot of knowing looks in that, because I think it's a very specific thing, while being different for everybody. Just that feeling of trying to get pregnant and people getting pregnant, the feeling you get is extraordinary. And as you say, Abby, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it is not okay. And you never know when that's going to be the case. On a practical level for me, friends, I voiced a lot of my need gently, and friends learnt that actually the best way to tell me they were pregnant was to text me or leave me a voice note. So it felt quite specific. And friends were generally, I'd say pretty much all of them, were so honoring of wanting to support me. And the text meant that you had time to process, because I'm happy for you. I just might cry when you tell me because I'm shocked, I didn't know you were trying, or I'm sad, or that really, whatever it might be. I just need a minute to process, and then I can be happy for you. And having that space and making that need known was really helpful. And I've tried to echo that moving forward, and I've definitely spread the word. Everyone, I'm just text your friends, just anyway. So that was one for me. I think, yeah, I would say, just as you were saying, Abby, I think people who could sit in the mess with me, I valued a lot. Some people were very good at that. Some people weren't and knew they weren't and loved me really well from afar, would just send flowers or a card or something, particularly when our IVF journey began. And I really valued that. That was really wonderful. And then some people weren't so good at it, and that was also okay. That had its space and its place, and they loved me really well as best they could. And I needed that at other times as well. The celebrating thing was a funny one. I felt particularly stung. My sister and my best friend both my two closest girls to me, and they got pregnant at the same time twice while we were trying. And that was really hard. That was very brutal for me. They were phenomenal in it. And the conversations that we had, this is probably where I'll start crying. There's a lot of process for me in it. Most of it, I'm quite an emotional person. I cry a lot. And there's actually very little sadness now. But the feeling coming back of how that felt for me just has so many mixed emotions. And obviously so unbelievably delighted with their journeys. And they hadn't been totally straightforward either. I mean, whose is? But it was amazing. It was just like the first time you're like, oh, it was when we just started trying. And I kept being like, I'm going to join the gang. Like, obviously I'll get pregnant, 3 of us together. That's like my dream in life. My sister and my best friend. I talked about it with the 2 of them since before I can remember, etc. And then it didn't happen. And the baby's born and then they get pregnant again. You're like, really, God? Like, really? Just like, did it need to happen twice? And learning within that to sit in that tension of joy and pain, which is what it was. And I, I'm really close with my sister, and we had a wonderful conversation when she found out she was pregnant with her third, which was the second round for me, of we can both sit, I needed her, desperately needed that process with her. I could not and couldn't have done it without her input emotionally for me. And so I couldn't ever be like, well, I just won't talk to you for 9 months or whatever. Obviously I wouldn't anyway, but I just couldn't be in that place. So we had to reach a point together of the tension of good and bad. Like, we were both so joyful that she was pregnant and could both also sit in the mess that I wasn't, and what that meant as well. And choosing to lean into, as well, for me, the joy and the pain of that. So seeing her pregnancy as such hope for me, and the same with my best friend. And at the same time, it being okay that it also highlighted what I didn't have. And I mean, there's a lot more that comes into it, because then suddenly I'm like, oh, I really wanted to have kids with you. And will I now? And I don't know what that looks like. And it was my dream that we'd have kids that grew up together and could be cousins together, and that's slowly disappearing. And it was her third baby, and you're like, oh gosh, and the pain that comes with that and the different layers of it. But that was a big process, learning to sit in the mess and learning to sit in the joy and how that works. And yeah, I learned a lot about myself and that process, and feel like it's one of the things I've taken away, is learning to mourn with those who mourn and be joyful with those who be joyful. And it's okay that I can just stay in my lane.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on around me.
And your relationship with your sister at that time, has it deepened through that level of communication and the tension and the pull that you described for both of you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the relationship that those 2 girls have, they're in the same academic year, which feels like a real gift, despite being 9 or so months apart in age. We feel so special. We just love seeing them together, and then being together is a real gift for us to witness. Yeah, I mean, we had a choice at that point, and we talked a lot about that choice, and we very much chose relationship. We chose to press into it. And as I said, I almost feel like I didn't have a choice, because I could not. I needed her. She knows me so well, and she's so such a pillar of wisdom and stoicism and solidarity for me, much as my mum is too, and my husband and my back. I felt like I had my club around me was strong, and I'm so thankful for that. But yeah, being my sister, I guess I didn't really feel like I had a choice, in the sense of we had to make this okay. We had to know how to go forward well. And so yeah, we figured out a way to make it work, and in a place where we could both be on. I didn't want her to be hiding things from me either. I wanted to know about her pregnancy journey and what was going on, and her scans, and how the baby was, and what sex the baby was, and their names, and all that sort of thing, and celebrate the birth. And yeah, so it had to be a big choice, and it deepened our relationship for sure. We're pretty tight anyway, so there wasn't a lot of place for it to go, but it definitely did. Yeah, and I'm glad we made that choice, and we're brave in our communication with that.
Yeah, not everyone makes that choice. And the communication is, actually, I would love to ask you about that, Abby. I think is massive. So being able to communicate what's helpful around announcements, what's not, what you need in the time is, again, it's a brave thing to bring upon yourself, but I think it's really helpful in terms of relational dynamics, of people knowing what you need, also you knowing what you need and appreciate. Because I think there can be like a complete avoidance or an awkwardness, or there can be people saying too much or saying the wrong thing. And then people sat in the middle going, I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, but I love this person, but I don't know. And so I think communication is huge in that. Have you got anything to say on that, Abby, in terms of, did you have a bit of you were obviously communicating about your journey, but to those around you who are your friends and family, to what is helpful and what's not, did you feel you were able to do that?
You know what? I just felt like that we have responsibility over how we react to what people are saying. And I don't know, the people that I was interacting with all meant well. And so often what we would say is like, just let them off the hook. Like, just let people off the hook because they don't know what to say and they mean well. And I suppose, I didn't want to sort of pick up offense. So we worked quite hard at just kind of let it go. I did post a few times on Instagram, like, things not to say to people who are infertile, which is helpful. And I think people kind of pick up on that. But let people off the hook.
Yeah. I think also just to add on to that, I don't know about you, but often I don't know what I needed. So there was a point to which I can't expect anyone else to know because it's just so all over the place. And sometimes you're fine and other times you are not and you can't predict when. And so I think, I have a lot of grace for people in that.
Yeah.
And of course, you both have children now. And as you said earlier, that doesn't change your story or change the things you've had to walk through. But I'd love to talk a little bit more of just the journey of becoming pregnant as well. So Ali, for you took the path of IVF. When you were considering that with your husband, what was that like for you from a perspective of faith and trusting God in that? What was that like for you two?
Yeah, it was a big decision. It was not something I took lightly. It made me realize the privilege I have had and still have with lots of topics when I hadn't had to think about it or make a decision on what I thought about it, because it wasn't in my periphery and now it suddenly was. And I was like, I now have to make a decision and I have to take time to figure it out. We found out that we were sort of told by the doctor that we were chatting to about our infertility. We were talking to the doctor in the January of 2021 about the fact that IVF was pretty much our only option. I was really devastated by that prognosis. It was not something I ever anticipated doing. For me, it was way in the future of, all the other things we'll try. But I mean, there isn't a lot else to try. It's sort of like you either get pregnant or you get pregnant with IVF or you just don't. Like there's not a lot in between of trying naturally and doing IVF. That was a big process. Just that being floated around as the option was big for me to swallow. And it was at the time of lockdown and it was January and it was dark. And my husband and I were both working really busy jobs at the time. We were both really, really busy, exhausted, cold. It was just a very unhappy time in that sense. Yeah, all of the things thrown into the mix just to make it terrible, which it was. We took some time off work. We just took a break. We prayed a lot about it. We read the Bible. We sat with God for a long time. We sought counsel with sort of people at our church who were older than us and more mature Christians than us, and listened about that. I felt a lot of shame about doing IVF. I'm not fully sure where that came from. I think, the process of working through that and how I felt like that, it wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something we took lightly. We figured out within it what our boundaries were. We had some strong boundaries within that. I think, I can understand people with hesitations about the sort of playing God role. I think that was a big consideration for us. And again, I can share the boundaries that we had, for which is where it was right for us and where we felt peace about. It's not the same for everyone, and that's totally an individual journey. For us, we felt thankful for IVF in the end, much like medical intervention can sometimes be such an amazing thing. Within that, we didn't want to create life we didn't steward well. So any embryos essentially that we had left over, so I guess fertilized eggs, which they tend to freeze and you can save you sort of have decisions about what to do with those. We definitely wanted to make sure that whatever our journey was, we transferred all of those eggs to me. So they were all given the chance to become children. And then in terms of the paperwork when you start IVF is like a stack because there are so many options within it. We weren't keen to donate any eggs. For us, if there was ever a problem with Sam or I, we wouldn't have got pregnant by a sperm or egg donor. Again, that's just where it sat with us that felt right. And that's kind of where we got to. So we sort of had these boundaries and we're very explicit with the doctors that we worked with about those boundaries. And then we started the process from there. So it was a long decision time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we landed.
That we were figuring out what worked for you both around that, knowing what you were going to say yes to and what you were saying no to is huge.
And where the Lord was giving us peace. And clinging on to what we felt for us and our journey and where we are at, what we felt was right. And that's where we landed at. Yeah.
Abby, you found out you were pregnant at a blood test. So I guess after kind of imagining a future where there may not be any children, firstly, what was that like? What happened when you found out? I would love to know. But also, had you made the decision at that point? Like IVF was a no-go, or were you still in a kind of deliberation phase, if you like?
I suppose like you guys, we didn't know we had to have an opinion on such things until you're faced with it. So hadn't really looked into it. I think for us, the IVF, we were in Malaysia at the time, so healthcare there is mostly private. And so if you want it, you pay for it, you get it, is kind of the mentality around healthcare. And so we had the privilege of kind of like, we were able to access kind of whatever level of healthcare we wanted. I think for us with IVF, again, we went round and round talking about it. I think not least the practicalities of it. It is not something to go into lightly. It is not casual. Well, from what I believe, and it sounds like you guys navigated it so wisely. For us, it was like financial implications, freezing embryos at the other side of the world. We were on 2-year visas. How would that work? And then there was a lot of like ethics around it. We had to really get to grips with like, what does the Bible say? How do we feel about this? When is life created? And so that was like heavy to talk about and to kind of bring up. We did a few things. So we did traditional Chinese medicine was something that we explored while I was like, we're in this part of the world. Like, why wouldn't we do this? Like, which was honestly totally brutal. It was awful. I found it, we had weekly treatment of like acupuncture and herbs, and it just like dug up everything every Friday morning. It like ruined the weekend. And so we did that for like a full cycle to test whether there'd been any improvement, and there wasn't. And so that was then quite helpful to be able to say, okay, we've done this for 3 months, we've tried, that's not going to happen. And I suppose in terms of medical intervention, that was sort of as far as we were okay with going. Everyone has a level. And I think that was the most helpful thing I read, was our decision not to pursue IVF did not mean that I wanted a baby less than Ali and Sam. Sam? Panic, that wasn't your husband's name. So like it doesn't mean that we didn't want a baby as much as them. And so I found that really freeing, that actually, you know, it's okay to not do anything. And you have to do something practically to be able to have a child, to be able to try and get pregnant. And so that was like, we were comfortable with that. It took us 3 years to get pregnant. If I was still sitting here today, would my opinion about IVF be the same? I don't know. But at the time, that's kind of where we sat with it.
Yeah. And when you actually found out you were pregnant, you were at a blood test.
Yes. Well, the blood test confirmed it. I actually found out in a shopping centre toilet on my own. Because I wanted a glass of wine, and I was like, I'm just going to double check because this just not sure. And again, like you feel little twinges and you're like, oh, hopefully it's implantation cramps and not my period coming. And so I was actually in a cubicle on my own. And I found out, and I just didn't believe it was real. So we immediately went and got blood tests, which I was scheduled for anyway.
Was Stu around?
He was in the restaurant, and he had ordered everything you're not allowed to eat when you're pregnant, because like I've never been pregnant. Why would I be pregnant? And he said, you're being so silly. Why are you going to get a pregnancy test? Like this, it's not going to happen. And then suddenly I like walked back to the restaurant and my face was just like totally white, and I just like burst into tears. I was so shocked. So Stu then had to drink all the wine himself, and he had like seafood pizza in front of him, and he was like, well, for me. And so we immediately then went and got blood tests, which I'd been asked to come and get anyway for something. And that confirmed it. But I think we just were in shock that this pregnancy would work, because we'd never experienced being pregnant before. And so I suppose for 3 years, I had limited my emotions. I had limited how much sadness I would allow myself to feel every month when there was failure. And I'd limited then like the joy of it. And so I'd say it took us probably the first trimester to actually feel the joy of being pregnant, because we just lived with such like a limited mindset for so many years. And we just didn't want to like let ourselves feel the full happiness of it.
Was it quite hard to shift from imagining a world, kind of a life without children though, because you maybe become a little bit accustomed to that, to then going, okay, it's a high possibility then that we're going to be raising our first child?
Yeah, there was. So I had started a master's. We had offered that we would go off and do like another church plant in a different part of Malaysia. Like we were like moving on. Stu was like, oh, I'll get my teeth done. If we don't have kids, we'll have money. They'll be able to like do stuff. And like, you just start like dreaming all these things. And so suddenly there was like oh my word, life's going to look pretty different. And we had to also weigh up, like, did we want to raise our child in Malaysia? Does that influence that we need to be closer to family? Which I don't know if it did in the end, actually. I think we're now back in the UK and we're very happy to be closer to family with our child. But yeah, it was a big shock. I think it took about 3 months to kind of readjust our expectations of what life was going to be like.
What a story. Ali, you've had a little girl through IVF, which is absolutely wonderful. You talked before about navigating the tension of the joy and the pain and the joy and the grief. What was that part of the journey like during IVF? Because as you said, it's incredibly invasive, but then also the emotional side of that is this going to work? And what if it doesn't? And how, have we just extended all of our options then and we come to the end, and what if nothing happens? So what was that like?
That was a big part of it. This is it. If this doesn't work, what then? And that was, I think, a big fear of mine. IVF is a lot on every level. It's a lot emotionally. It's a lot physically. It asks a lot of your body. It asks a lot of your mind. It's a pressure on relationships. I felt really lonely in it. My husband was amazing. My friends were amazing. Like my mum, my sister, my best friend, my kind of core were phenomenal. And Mum, I remember saying to me many points, I was super teary on the phone to Mum. And I remember her just saying like, but Jesus gets it, because he was a human. So he does get it. And you're like, oh, yeah, like people do understand. It just feels so far away, this ability to not be able to have a child and doing something massive that you're not sure if it's going to work, and you're not. And I think my faith journey in that time ended up looking a lot like I'm not owed anything. It will be okay. But okay doesn't necessarily look like a baby. And actually our first round of IVF didn't work. So there was that to navigate with as well. And again, the most brutal discovery that it didn't work. I'd taken some time off work. Some of my IVF drugs actually made me really ill. So I'd had a stint off just being unwell. And then we'd had a lovely holiday booked away that we couldn't take. So I had that time booked off work anyway. And the morning I went back to work, straight into a major meeting, I literally just like, quick wee before I go into this big meeting, and got my period. And it was like, cool, God, of all times for me to find this out when I'm about to walk into a meeting that was important, and I was finally back and we were all cracking on with work. And I mean, it was exactly that. It was a really big tension of clinging on to hope. And I kept reminding myself of things like, I'm a child of hope. This is what I'm called to be. And I got to the stage sometimes I remember it so clearly, I'd be in my kitchen. Oh, it makes me want to cry thinking about it, in floods of tears. And I'd have to say out loud things that I was thankful for, because it was so hard in that moment it sounds silly because part of me now is a bit like it was pregnancy, and life is huge and things happen to people all the time that are massive. And I'm not trying to claim any kind of big revelation on this being, so revolutionary. But for me, it was big. And at the time it was big. And I would have to stand there and just say things out loud that I was thankful for, like basic things like my house and my family and my husband and my friends, which I am so thankful for. But I
I had to remind myself of the goodness of God in it because it was really painful. And IVF is a journey of lots of little journeys. So you have lots of injections and lots of hormones, and you get lots of scans that will kind of look at how you're doing, how your body's doing, how you're responding to the drugs, that will tell you whether or not you're ready for egg collection or transfer, whatever that might look like. So our first round, actually, there were lots of victories. Everything was going so well. And I was so thankful for that. And then our second round was a bit different. I was a bit slower. I think they probably medically say it wasn't a big deal. For me, it felt big because my lining wasn't quite thick enough of various scans. It took quite a while to get to the point of having the transfer, which I didn't anticipate. And, that it throws up a lot. And it was an ebb and flow, a constant ebb and flow of, I feel fine, I feel good, I feel full of hope. And then deep devastation that this is what's happening to me and this is what I'm going through, and nights of just alarms going off so I can inject myself. And you're like, what is going on? Like, what is going on? How am I here? Like, why am I doing this? And it was painful. But then, at the times when you feel strong, the relationship I had with God and the hope that I had and the understanding of his love for me and the closeness I had to him was just so beautiful. And something that, with every will in the world, I'm so thankful for so many parts of our journey. I'm not thankful it happened. I wish it hadn't happened, and if my timeline, had been what I want, I would have 3 children by now with my best friend and my sister, and they'd be the same age and it would be amazing. And this is all so much later than I ever anticipated it being. And obviously that's changed a lot of other things in our life, and that's okay. But I learned a lot about not sweating the small stuff, I think, and recognizing God's goodness in deep pain and sitting in mess and that being okay, and walking that tightrope, as we were talking about, of joy and pain all at the same time, and all these things happening in life. And it's always that, even someone who passes away, you're like, their life was phenomenal and it's so sad they're gone. But sitting on that line and not having to be anything, just being that is just what it is, and that's okay. I think that a big thing for me was when I took my pregnancy test and I got pregnant after the 2-week wait. I don't know about you, Abby, but I guess similar to you, I was almost disappointed because it wasn't the elation I'd hoped for. I was full of anxiety, and my pregnancy was really quite an anxious pregnancy. So thankful to God that my journey as a mother has been much less so. I think my husband and I both a bit like through my pregnancy were like, wow, I was really quite anxious. And it was like, is this what it's going to be like now? Or are we going to relearn to re-collaborate and feel a little bit more on track? Which we did. And I don't feel like that's been, as journey as a mother has not been nearly as anxious as that at all. And I feel much calmer and much more me in how I've parented. But I had a really anxious pregnancy because it's hard to undo learned behavior. My learned behavior was that this was not going to happen for me. And you have to undo that. And again, stop speaking narratives over yourself that God's not given you. Like, God never said that. And I chose to walk in that path at times because it was a lie that I had listened to and I ran with. And it was undoing all these things that I'd picked up along the way, and just choosing to try and reflect what Jesus was saying and Holy Spirit was giving me at the time, or speaking to me about, and sitting with God and not allowing it to be a narrative I, as a human being, a flawed human being, had written over myself. Yeah.
And I know this journey is obviously, there's some incredible beauty has come out of it, but there's been a lot of pain. And I know for you, a lot of trauma as well. So even thinking about the potential of more children, does it fill you with anxiety, that journey? Are you more content? Is it walking that tightrope again? Do you feel like it's time to walk that tightrope again?
All of the above. I think we're already there. So we're already trying for a second baby. Tallulah's 10 months old. I'm back on my cycle, which I'm choosing to see as a gift, although it's been a few months now and nothing's happened. There's a lot in the mix, I would say. I'm trying very hard not to project myself, again, not to write this narrative that doesn't exist of what this was like for me, 3 years into trying to have a baby. I'm not 3 years into trying to have a baby. I also have a baby. So I'm trying to not, I don't know about you, Abby, but that niggling feeling of your period pain is a flood of feelings that are hard to swallow and are painful, and trying to be very strict on myself mentally that I'm in a different place and I have a baby and this is actually not, what this necessarily is, and trying to not go there so aggressively, I suppose. So I'm trying to still remain in a place of being calm, of sitting with God in it, of really listening to his word in it. I feel trusting of his timing. And I'm hopeful at the same time. I'm thankful for Tallulah, and it's okay if that's our gift. And that's okay. It doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't mean I am, I think the extra guilt of not gifting siblings I'm really close with both of my siblings. I love them dearly as friends, close friends and siblings. And so a part of that is hard. Tallulah is definitely quite an extroverted baby. She loves being around other people. And that adds an extra layer of pressure, and that I would love to gift her a sibling. But at the same time, God knows her and her needs, and he knows me and my needs and my husband's. And if that's what our family looks like, I'm so thankful for that. And if it looks like lots of children, I'm thankful for that. We, at the end of IVF, we ended with 2 embryos. And so one of them was a transfer that didn't work out, and the second one was Tallulah. So we're sort of back at ground zero there, which feels like a real gift. I don't know, because obviously at times I'm like, if I knew that there were some embryos there and I didn't have to go through a whole cycle of IVF again, if that's what we choose to do, would feel quite freeing. I don't have that. So I don't know. I don't know what I feel about that. I feel both and all things of happy and sad and elated, but not. And it's a confusing time. So yeah, it's a big process. And I would say a few months into trying, it's bigger than I thought. I thought I was potentially more equipped, or that I would be, which is what I thought listening to podcasts or talks or watching people on YouTube, whatever it might be, or reading books before I walked into this, and them talking about more children. But you've got one, like, hooray, hallelujah, which it is. I didn't think I would feel quite so much pain about already wanting another baby as quickly as I do, if I'm being really honest. And it's not, I don't love my daughter, obviously. So thankful for her, but almost like the thankfulness is so big in me. I want more of it.
And you don't need to explain that, do you? We know it's a beautiful story that you've both been able to have children, but it doesn't erase the journey you've been on. It doesn't erase some of the trauma and the anxiety, or sadly, that you've had to walk through. Lastly, Abby, I'd just love to know from you, for women who are walking through this now, what would kind of be your biggest offering to them?
I think for me, I resonated so much with the verse, in Matthew 5, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I feel really differently to you. I think being infertile was one of the most formative things I've ever been through. And I suppose for people who are currently going through it, glean whatever you can from both of our stories. But one thing I'd say, one of the biggest things we took away from it was, you are out of control, but you can navigate it closely with God. And I felt like he was so close in the whole process. And I was so thankful for his presence with us, and he wants to be involved in that. I think there's no right way to deal with infertility. You can, therapy, friendship, going off Instagram, eating more chocolate. There's so many ways to kind of deal and process it. And I think for us, what happened with the shift in my life was, I wasn't desperate for a baby. I was desperate to understand. And that was the biggest shift, that I essentially stopped praying to get pregnant and started praying to understand what God was trying to do. And that was the change in my head, that I then felt like I could sustain it, because then even if I got pregnant or not, I was just trying to ask the Lord, what are you doing in my life? Is this your will for my life now? And that was what helped sustain me for the long haul. And that's what stayed with me through it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so good.
It is good. Abby, Ali, thank you so much for sharing your stories with such grace and vulnerability and openness. We know that's not easy, but we also know this conversation is so vital. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.